My neighbor reported me to the HOA 37 times in 2 years. My grass was half an inch too tall. My trash can stay outside for 20 minutes after pickup. My Christmas lights came down one day late. He smiled every time I got another fine. Then the empty lot next to his house went up for sale. And I realized I had one chance to beat him at his own game. When I bought my house, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, clean yards, families walking their dogs every evening, kids riding bikes. Exactly what I'd been looking for. The realtor smiled as we finished the tour. There's just one thing. I laughed. There's always one thing. She hesitated. The man next door. What about him? Just try to stay on his good side. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I shrugged it off. Big mistake. 3 days after moving in, I met him. He walked across my driveway before I'd even finished unpacking. Perfectly pressed polo shirt, khaki shorts, clipboard under one arm. Not kidding, a clipboard. He smiled. You must be the new owner. Yeah, I'm Mark. He didn't shake my hand. Instead, he looked around my yard. Your mailbox is leaning. I blinked. It is. HOA regulation says no more than 5 degrees. I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. My name's Richard. I've lived here 22 years. I also serve on the HOA compliance committee. That explained everything. He pointed toward my garage. Garbage cans have to be stored out of public view. I literally moved in today. I know. I'm just letting you know. Then he smiled again. Welcome to the neighborhood. 4 days later, I received my first violation notice. Mailbox alignment. Warning. No fine. Yet. I fixed it. Thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't even the beginning. Over the next 6 months, Richard became obsessed with my house. My lawn was supposedly too long. It wasn't. My hedge was supposedly too tall. It wasn't. My basketball hoop sat in my driveway for one afternoon. Violation. My truck was parked facing the wrong direction overnight. Violation. Holiday decorations removed one day late. Violation. A flower pot was the wrong color. Violation. Wine blew a recycling bin sideways. Violation. I started keeping every letter. By Christmas. I had 17. One Saturday morning, I caught him. I looked out my front window. Richard was standing in my yard, taking pictures. Of my grass. I walked outside. What are you doing? He didn't even look embarrassed. Documenting violations. You walked onto my property. I didn't damage anything. You didn't answer my question. He smiled. I don't need to. Then he walked away. I filed a complaint with the HOA. Nothing happened. Apparently. Richard wasn't just on the compliance committee. He was friends with almost everyone on the board. Convenient. Things got worse. Neighbors quietly warned me, don't argue with Richard. He'll just report you more. One older man across the street laughed. You're his new hobby. I thought he was exaggerating until I checked my mailbox. Another violation. Gross height. Again. I measured it. Exactly 3 inches. The HOA limit, 3 inches. Richard had somehow decided. Mine was 3 and 1-8. After 2 years, I'd received 37 complaints, paid over $2,000 in fines, installed security cameras, saved every letter, photographed my yard every weekend. I felt like I was collecting evidence for a murder trial. Then. One afternoon, a real estate sign appeared. Not in front of Richard's house, but on the empty lot beside his. I didn't think much about it until I overheard him talking to another neighbor. I hope nobody buys it. I like having the extra privacy. He laughed. I practically treat it like my own yard. I looked at the lot. Then back at Richard. And for the first time in 2 years, I smiled. Because an idea had just crossed my mind. An idea that would change everything. Asterisk. I called the number on the real estate sign before I could talk myself out of it. The agent answered on the second ring. Hi, this is Lisa. I'm calling about the vacant lot on Maple Drive. She immediately laughed. You and 3 other people today. Is it already under contract? Not yet. When can I see it? How about this afternoon by 5 o'clock? I was standing in the middle of the lot. It wasn't huge, just under half an acre. but it bordered Richard's property on one side and mine on the other. The entire backyard ran alongside his. Lisa smiled. Beautiful location. It is. The previous owner never built anything. Why, she shrugged. The family inherited several properties. They're finally selling this one. I walked the property line. Something caught my attention. Half of Richard's landscaping was actually on this lot. Flower beds, decorative stones, a small wooden bench, even part of his irrigation system. I looked at Lisa. Does he own any of this? She frowned. No, everything beyond those survey markers belongs to this parcel. Interesting? Very interesting. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Buying the lot wasn't exactly cheap. But I could afford it. Barely. Was it worth it? Probably not. Was I tired of letting Richard make my life miserable? Absolutely. By Monday morning, I'd submitted an offer. 3 days later, Lisa called. They accepted. I smiled. When do we close? The closing took less than an hour as I signed the final document. The attorney slid the survey map toward me. Every property line, every easement, every restriction, perfectly documented. I asked one question. So everything inside these boundaries, he nodded, is now yours. I drove straight to the lot. Richard was outside watering his flowers. The flowers that were now on my property. He waved. Looks like someone bought it. I smiled. Yeah, I did. The hose slipped from his hand. You, what? I own it now. He laughed. No, I held up the folder. Closed about an hour ago. His smile disappeared. For almost a full minute, he didn't say a word. Then he finally asked, what are you planning to build? I haven't decided. He forced a laugh. Probably nothing. Maybe not. The next morning, I hired a licensed survey company. Bright orange flags appeared all over the property, including right through Richard's flower garden. He stormed across the yard before the survey crew had even packed up. What are these? The property line. They're wrong. The surveyor calmly handed him a copy of the official plat. They're accurate within half an inch. Richard stared at the paper. Then at me. You knew. I smiled. I wanted to be sure. 2 days later, I received another HOA violation. Improper lawn maintenance. I laughed out loud. The complaint included photos. Richard had photographed my backyard again, unfortunately for him. One of his own flower beds was clearly visible. On my property, I immediately emailed the HOA along with the survey and a simple message, I'd like to report unauthorized landscaping on my land. The board replied the next day. For the first time, not a single person defended Richard. Instead, they asked him to remove everything that crossed the property line. Within 30 days, that evening, Richard knocked on my front door. His smile was gone. I think we can work something out. I folded my arms. I'm listening. He pointed toward the lot. My wife planted those flowers. They've been there 15 years. I understand. So, can they stay? I looked him straight in the eyes. The HOA rules are very clear. His face tightened. What? I smiled. I figured nobody knows them better than you. He turned around without saying another word. But 3 mornings later, I looked out my window and saw a construction company unloading stacks of lumber right in the middle of my vacant lot. I had never hired them. Asterisk guy was out the door before the first truck finished unloading. 3 pickup trucks, a trailer, stacks of pressure-treated lumber, concrete bags, fence panels. The crew had already marked the ground with orange spray paint. One of the workers smiled. Morning. What are you guys building? A privacy fence. I frowned. For who? He looked confused. The owner. I am the owner. The man's smile disappeared. What? I bought this property last week. He looked over his shoulder. Hang on. A few seconds later, the foreman walked over. He carried a clipboard Sir, I'm Daniel. I own this lot. He looked at his paperwork. No, our contract says Richard Thompson. My stomach tightened. Richard came walking out of his garage like he'd been waiting for this moment. Oh, you're home. I folded my arms. Care to explain why there's a construction crew on my land? He shrugged. They're building my fence on my property. It'll only take a few feet. I laughed. No, the foreman interrupted. Guys, I don't really care who's right. I just need to know if we're supposed to keep working. I pulled the folded survey map out of my truck, opened it on the hood. This property line, I pointed directly at the stakes. Everything on this side belongs to me. The foreman studied it. Then looked at Richard. You told us this was your property. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the HOA across the street. We already have approval. I smiled. From the HOA, he nodded confidently. I asked one simple question. Did the HOA buy this land? His expression changed. No. I did. The foreman sighed. I'm shutting this down until somebody figures this out. Within 10 minutes. The trucks were leaving. Richard looked furious. He stormed back inside without another word. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA. Violation notice. I actually laughed. Reason: preventing approved neighborhood improvements. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I immediately requested an emergency meeting with the HOA board. To my surprise, they agreed. Friday evening, 7 o'clock. The meeting room was packed out apparently. Everyone wanted to watch Richard and me argue. Richard sat at one end of the table, looking completely confident. The HOA president smiled politely. Mr. Carter, Richard tells us you interfered with an approved fence installation. I nodded. I did. And why? Because they were building it on my property. Richard slid a folder across the table. I have approval. The president looked through it. Everything seemed official. Stamped, signed, approved. Then he looked at me. Mr. Carter, I quietly placed my own folder on the table. This is the recorded property survey. The room became silent. One board member adjusted his glasses. Another leaned forward. The president compared both documents. Then frowned. Richard, these fence plans don't match the legal property line. Richard immediately answered, the survey must be wrong. I couldn't help smiling. It was completed 9 days ago by the same license company your HOA recommends. One of the board members asked, Richard, when did you submit these fence plans? He checked the paperwork. About 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? I hadn't owned the lot yet. Then something clicked. I looked at the approval packet again. One page caught my attention. The site map. It wasn't based on the official survey. It was a hand-drawn sketch. I slowly looked up. You never hired a surveyor. Richard didn't answer. You just drew where you wanted the property line to be. Still nothing. The president looked at Richard. Is that true? Richard cleared his throat. I estimated. The room exploded. Several board members started talking over each other. You approved this without verifying it. How did this even happen? This should have never been signed. The meeting ended without a decision. The board promised to investigate. As everyone stood to leave. An elderly woman I'd never met walked over to me. She introduced herself quietly. My name is Helen. I've lived here since this neighborhood was built. She glanced to make sure Richard couldn't hear. Then whispered, Richard has been stealing pieces of that vacant lot for almost 20 years. I stared at her. What do you mean? She leaned even closer. You're not the first owner. And I have photographs proving it. I didn't sleep much that night. Helen's words kept replaying in my head. You're not the first owner. And I have photographs proving it. If that was true, Richard's behavior wasn't something new. He'd been doing this for years, maybe decades. The next afternoon. Helen invited me over. Her house sat 2 doors down. The moment I stepped inside, I realized she'd never thrown anything away. Every shelf was filled with photo albums, labeled by year. Even neighborhood newsletters. She smiled. My husband used to photograph everything, every barbecue, every block party, every holiday. She placed three thick albums on the dining table. And thankfully, he also loved taking pictures of the neighborhood. For nearly 2 hours, we flipped through old photographs. Kids riding bicycles, 4th of July cookouts. Halloween decorations. Nothing unusual. Then Helen stopped. There. She pointed to a picture dated 17 years earlier. I looked closer. The empty lot. Richard's backyard. And no flower garden. No bench. No decorative stones. Nothing. She turned another page. 3 years later. Suddenly. A small flower bed had appeared. Not on Richard's property. On the vacant lot. Another page. A wooden bench. Another. Stone landscaping. Another. A sprinkler system. Each year, Richard had moved farther onto land that wasn't his, just a few feet at a time. So slowly, nobody noticed. I couldn't believe it. He really did this one piece at a time. Helen nodded. That's exactly how. No one questioned it. The lot stayed empty, so everyone eventually assumed it belonged to him. Then she handed me another envelope. This is the important part. Inside were printed emails. I frowned. What are these? The previous owner's daughter sent them to me years ago. She asked if I'd seen anyone using the property. One email caught my attention. We're thinking about selling Dad's lot, but the neighbor keeps claiming part of it belongs to him. My eyes widened. The email was nearly 10 years old. Did they ever do anything? Helen sighed. No, they lived out of state. They didn't want the headache, so they left everything alone. Exactly what Richard had been counting on. That evening, I scanned every photo, every email, every document Helen gave me. Then I organized them into a timeline. Year by year. Photo by photo. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 days later, the HOA board contacted me. We've completed our preliminary review. I drove to the clubhouse. This meeting felt different. Richard wasn't smiling for the first time since I'd met him. He looked nervous. The HOA president cleared his throat. We've confirmed the recent survey is accurate. Richard immediately interrupted. I still disagree. The president ignored him. However, he looked toward me. Double quotes. Mr. Carter submitted additional historical evidence. I placed Helen's albums on the table. I'd like everyone to see something. One by one, I spread the photographs across the conference table. Every single photo showed Richard expanding farther onto someone else's land. Slowly. Deliberately. One board member whispered, "You've got to be kidding." Another picked up a photo. He wasn't maintaining the lot. He was taking it. Richard suddenly stood up. Those pictures don't prove anything. They're just old photographs. I calmly slid the printed emails across the table. Then maybe these will. The president read the first one, then the second. His expression completely changed. Richard, he looked up. Did you ever tell the previous owners that this property belonged to you? Richard hesitated. The silence answered the question. The room erupted into arguments. Several board members began questioning how Richard had remained on the compliance committee for so many years. Others wanted an outside legal review. For the first time, nobody was defending him. As the meeting finally ended, Richard walked past me. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. You think you've won? I didn't answer. He smiled. This neighborhood doesn't know everything. Then he quietly added, wait until they find out what you're planning to build on that lot. I frowned. I haven't planned anything. His smile grew even wider. You will, once they hear the rumors I started this morning. I watched him walk away. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of my neighbors. Is it true you're building a 3-story rental complex next door? I stared at the screen. I had never said anything about building anything. I stared at the text message. Is it true you're building a 3-story rental complex next door? I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was completely ridiculous. I hadn't even decided whether I wanted to build a shed. Before I could reply, another message arrived. Please tell me you aren't putting in an Airbnb. Then another. Someone said you'll be renting to college students. Another, are we losing our property values? Within 15 minutes, I'd received 9 messages, all asking the same question. None of them were true. It didn't take a genius to figure out where the rumors had started. Richard. He couldn't win with surveys. He couldn't win with HOA rules. So he decided to turn the neighborhood against me. That evening, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, 3 neighbors were standing there. Tom, Linda, and Carlos. Tom spoke first. We just wanted to ask you directly. I nodded. Double quotes ask, are you building apartments? No, an Airbnb. No, a storage facility. I couldn't help laughing. No, Carlos frowned. Then where are all these stories coming from? I answered honestly, I think, Richard. The 3 of them exchanged looks. None of them seemed surprised. The next morning, I decided to fight rumors with facts. I printed a large sign. Simple. White background, black letters. It read, no construction has been planned for this property. Any rumors are false. I placed it near the front of the lot. By lunchtime, half the neighborhood had stopped to read it. Richard didn't like that. Not one bit. Around 3 that afternoon, he walked over carrying another clipboard. I think your sign violates HOA rules. I smiled. Which rule? It isn't approved. I nodded. Show me. He flipped through several pages. Then another. Then another. Nothing. I waited. Finally. He quietly closed the binder. I'll find it. I smiled wider. I'm sure you will. That night. Something strange happened. One of my security cameras sent an alert. Motion detected. To 14 a.m. I opened the footage. A man wearing a hoodie walked onto my vacant lot. He carried something over his shoulder. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but I could clearly see him digging near the back fence. For nearly 20 minutes. Then he left. I drove over before sunrise. The ground had definitely been disturbed. Fresh dirt, fresh footprints. Whoever had been there. Wanted to hide something or bury something. I grabbed a shovel from my garage, started digging. About 8 inches down, the shovel hit plastic. I carefully pulled it out, a weatherproof storage container. Locked, I carried it back to my garage. The lock wasn't difficult to remove. Inside. Were dozens of documents. Old property surveys. Photographs. Receipts. And a thick notebook. The first page read, property line disputer. Card Thompson. I sat down immediately. The notebook was filled with handwritten notes. Dates. Measurements. Sketches. Every few pages. Richard had written things like, move flower bed another 6 inches this spring. Nobody noticed the new stones. Previous owners still haven't visited. Keep expanding slowly. My jaw dropped. He had documented everything. Then I found something even worse. Near the back, there was a section titled, Future Plans. The first item read, if the lot ever sells. Pressure the new owner until they sell it to me. The second line made my blood run cold. If that doesn't work. Double quotes make the neighborhood hate them. I slowly closed the notebook. Every complaint, every fine, every rumor, it had all been planned. For years. Just as I reached for my phone to call the HOA president, someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked through the window. 2 police officers were standing outside. One of them asked, Mr. Carter, did you damage your neighbor's property sometime last night? I opened the front door. The 2 officers stood on my porch with serious expressions. One of them held a small notebook. Mr. Carter. Yes, I'm Officer Jenkins. This is Officer Alvarez. We'd like to ask you a few questions. About what? Officer Jenkins glanced toward Richard's house. Your neighbor filed a vandalism complaint. I actually laughed. You're kidding. I wish I were. What exactly am I accused of? Officer Alvarez looked down at his notes. Destroying landscaping, damaging an irrigation system, and removing decorative property. I blinked. From my own land? The 2 officers exchanged a quick look. Apparently. Richard hadn't mentioned that part. I invited them into the garage. The survey map was still spread across my workbench. Orange survey flags, property records, everything. I think there's some context you're missing. For nearly 20 minutes, I explained everything: the vacant lot, the survey, the HOA meetings, the photographs, Helen's evidence. The officers listened carefully. Neither interrupted. Finally, Officer Jenkins pointed at the weatherproof container sitting on my workbench. What's that? I found it buried on my property this morning. You opened it? I did. What was inside? I hesitated. Evidence. I handed him Richard's notebook. He read one page, then another. His eyebrows slowly rose. Officer Alvarez leaned over. Within seconds, both officers were reading silently. Officer Jenkins finally looked up. Where exactly did you find this? I pointed toward the vacant lot. About 8 inches underground. He closed the notebook. We're going to need to take this, I figured, before they could leave. Another patrol car pulled into the driveway. Then another. Not for me. For Richard, apparently. One of the officers had called a supervisor after reading the notebook. Richard walked outside, still wearing that same smug expression. It disappeared the moment he saw 4 police officers. He immediately pointed toward me. That's him. He's trespassing, Officer Jenkins calmly answered, on his own property. Richard froze. Then Officer Alvarez asked, Mr. Thompson, double quotes, do you mind explaining why your personal notebook was buried on someone else's land? Richard's face lost all color. My what notebook? Officer Alvarez held it up. This one. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly at me. For the first time, I saw genuine panic. We're also curious, Officer Jenkins continued, why it contains detailed notes about moving landscaping farther onto property you didn't own. Still no answer. Then Richard did something I never expected. He turned around and started walking back toward his house, fast, very fast. Officer Jenkins called out, Mr. Thompson. Richard kept walking. Stop, instead. Richard broke into a run. He barely made it 20 feet. One officer caught him before he reached his front porch. The entire neighborhood watched. Curtains opened. Front doors cracked. People stepped onto their driveways. Within minutes, half the street was outside. Richard wasn't arrested, not yet, but he was detained while the officers sorted everything out. As they searched the area around the flower beds, one officer called everyone over. He'd found another buried container, then another, then a third, all on my property. Inside were more documents, old surveys, receipts, letters, even photographs dating back almost 20 years. Richard hadn't buried one box. He'd created an archive, like he'd been preparing for something. Officer Jenkins looked at me. I've been doing this job 18 years. I've never seen someone document their own property encroachment this thoroughly. Neither had one. Just as the officers finished loading the boxes into evidence bags, Helen slowly walked across the street. She looked at Richard, then quietly said, I told you, double quotes, one day, someone was finally going to buy that lot. Richard lowered his head. He didn't say a single word. That evening, I thought the nightmare was finally ending. Then my phone rang. It was the HOA president. His voice sounded shaken. Daniel, we've discovered something. What? It isn't just your lot. There was a long pause. Then he quietly said, Richard has been collecting HOA fines from homeowners, that were never recorded in the HOA's financial records. I sat there in silence. What do you mean? The fines weren't recorded. The HOA president sighed. We're still reviewing everything, but our treasurer found something very strange. What? There are dozens of receipts homeowners received over the years, but the money never appeared in our accounting system. I frowned. How is that possible? We don't know yet. I drove to the clubhouse immediately. The board was already gathered. Nobody looked relaxed, Stacks of financial records covered the conference table. The treasurer looked exhausted. I've been comparing bank statements all afternoon. He rubbed his eyes. I should have done this years ago. Richard had always volunteered to collect violation payments, especially from new homeowners. He'd tell people, "I'll save you a trip. Just give the check to me." Most people trusted him. After all, he was on the compliance committee. The treasurer held up two folders. "These are the official deposits." Then another stack. "These are the receipts homeowners kept." The numbers didn't match. Not even close. One receipt caught my attention. It belonged to me. HOA fine, $175 paid, signed by Richard. I remembered writing that check. The treasurer searched the bank records. Nothing. No deposit. I frowned. "What?" He looked up. "Your payment never reached the HOA." Then another homeowner checked her files. Same thing. Then another. And another. Within an hour, they'd found 23 missing payments, totaling almost $12,000. The HOA president leaned back in his chair. "This can't be an accounting mistake." The treasurer slowly nodded. "It isn't." One older couple produced receipts from almost 8 years earlier, missing a young family had 4 missing, a retired teacher had 6 missing. Everything pointed to one person, Richard. Just then, the clubhouse doors opened. 2 detectives walked inside. Not patrol officers. Financial crimes investigators, apparently. The police had already contacted them after finding Richard's buried documents. One detective introduced herself. "I'm Detective Monroe." She looked around the room. "We'll need copies of every receipt." Every homeowner immediately handed theirs over. Monroe spread a large map across the table. Then another folder. "This investigation is getting much bigger." She pointed to several neighboring communities. "Richard didn't only serve on this HOA, he volunteered as a consultant for 4 others." The room fell silent. The detective continued. "We're now reviewing financial records from all of them." Someone whispered, "How much money are we talking about?" She answered without hesitation. "We don't know yet, but it could be well into 6 figures." I couldn't believe it. For 2 years, I thought Richard was just an annoying neighbor. Turns out, the property dispute had exposed something much larger. As everyone talked, Helen quietly walked over to me. I remembered something. "What?" "My late husband. He never paid Richard directly." I looked at her. "Why not?" "He said Richard asked him to, but Frank refused." "What happened?" Helen smiled sadly. "Richard never spoke to us again." That explained everything. Richard didn't just target random people. He targeted homeowners he believed were easy to intimidate. New residents, older couples, busy families, anyone unlikely to question him. 3 days later, the police executed a search warrant on Richard's house. By evening, the entire street knew. Evidence boxes, computers, filing cabinets, hard drives, even a floor safe. Everything was carried out. Late that night, the HOA president called me again. His voice sounded almost unbelievable. "Daniel. They opened Richard's safe, and..." There was a long silence. Then he quietly said, "They found cash. Lots of it." "How much?" Another pause. "Just under $214,000. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. $214,000, the HOA president sighed. "That's the preliminary count, in cash." I slowly sat down. "You're telling me he kept over $200,000 in a safe?" "Yes, and that's before investigators finished counting everything else." The news spread through the neighborhood before sunrise. Every driveway had people standing outside. Nobody was talking about landscaping anymore. Nobody cared about the property line. The entire neighborhood wanted to know the same thing. How had Richard hidden this for so long? By lunchtime, local news vans were parked outside the subdivision. Reporters interviewed homeowners. Several people refused, others couldn't wait to talk. One elderly man shook his head. I've been paying HOA fines to that guy for 15 years. I thought I was helping the neighborhood. That afternoon, Detective Monroe called me. Daniel, we need another statement. Sure. This isn't about the property anymore. What is it about? She paused. We believe Richard committed organized financial fraud. I met her at the police station. She had a wall covered with photographs, maps, bank statements, neighborhood names. Richard's picture sat in the center. Strings connected him to dozens of documents. It looked like something from a crime documentary. Monroe handed me a spreadsheet. Take a look. I scanned the first page. Violation payments, addresses, dates, amounts. There were hundreds of entries. Not dozens, hundreds. These are only the homeowners we'd confirmed. I looked up. Only, she nodded. We're still finding more. Then she flipped another page. Something immediately caught my attention. Several payments were highlighted in yellow. What does yellow mean? Cash. I frowned. He asked people to pay cash frequently, especially older residents. Monroe pointed toward one name. Mrs. Jenkins, 82 years old. Richard told her cash payments were processed faster. I clenched my jaw. Did they ever reach the HOA? No, another page, another elderly couple. Another missing payment. Another, and another. The pattern never changed. Then Monroe placed a photograph in front of me. It showed Richard standing beside three men I'd never seen before. Recognize anyone? No, we didn't either. She tapped one face. This man owns a landscaping company. Another. This one builds fences. The third. General contractor. What does that mean? We think Richard wasn't acting alone, apparently. Whenever someone questioned a property line, Richard already had contractors willing to back up his version. Sometimes they installed fences. Sometimes they moved landscaping. Sometimes they simply claimed. This has always been the boundary. Monroe folded her arms. We're investigating whether anyone knowingly helped him. As I was leaving, she stopped me. One more thing. She handed me another folder. Inside were copies of neighborhood surveys dating back almost 25 years. Every few years, the property boundaries looked slightly different. Only by inches, never enough for people to notice. Richard hadn't stolen land all at once. He'd stolen it one season at a time. Move a flower bed, shift a hedge, extend a sprinkler line, plant another tree. Wait a year, repeat. By the time homeowners realized something was wrong, it looked like the landscaping had always been there. It was calculated, patient, and unbelievably effective. A week later, the HOA held its first public meeting since the investigation began. More than 100 residents showed up. People filled every chair. Others stood along the walls. The president stepped to the microphone. I owe every homeowner an apology. The room became silent. Our board trusted one person for far too long. Then he announced something nobody expected. Effective immediately, the current HOA board is resigning. Gasps echoed across the room. Every board member stood. One by one, they all resigned together. As everyone processed the announcement, the clubhouse doors suddenly opened. A man in an expensive gray suit walked inside. He introduced himself. My name is Michael Avery. I'm the attorney representing the family that originally owned the vacant lot. I frowned. I already bought it. He nodded. I know. I'm not here about the sale. He opened a leather briefcase, pulled out a stack of documents, then looked directly at me. Mr. Carter, I believe Richard may have taken more than just your land. Asterisk, the room fell completely silent. I looked at the attorney. Double quotes. What do you mean? Michael Avery carefully placed several old surveys and legal files on the table. I'm representing the Harrison family. They owned the vacant lot before you. I nodded. I know. He sighed. What you probably don't know is that Richard didn't start with your property. He unfolded an old subdivision map. The paper looked ancient. Yellow around the edges. This neighborhood was built 26 years ago. He pointed to several lots. These were all originally larger. I frowned. Larger. He nodded. By a few feet. The attorney slid another survey beside it. Then a newer one. At first, I couldn't see the difference. Then it hit me. Every property touching Richard's lot had become slightly smaller. Not much. Sometimes 18 inches, sometimes 3 feet, sometimes only a foot. But every single adjustment benefited one house, Richard's. That's impossible. Michael shook his head. No, it's illegal. But not impossible. Helen leaned forward. I knew something wasn't right. The attorney smiled politely. So did the Harrison family. They hired 3 surveyors over the years. Each one confirmed the same thing. So why didn't they sue? I asked. They tried. Michael opened another folder. Richard delayed everything. Appeals, new surveys, boundary disputes, mediation. Then the owner passed away. The children lived in different states. Eventually, they gave up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard hadn't simply bullied people. He'd exhausted them. Year after year. Until they stopped fighting, Michael continued. Your purchase changed everything. How? Because you hired an independent survey immediately. The Harrisons never did after the sale. You accidentally froze the property lines before Richard could manipulate them again. The HOA president slowly rubbed his forehead. So, how much land are we talking about? Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he spread another aerial photograph across the table. The image had colored outlines. Green, yellow, red. Every red section represented land Richard had slowly absorbed over to decades. I stared at it. It wasn't a flower bed anymore. Or a bench. Or a fence. It was nearly 1/3 of an acre. Someone in the back of the room whispered. Oh my God, Michael nodded. Current market value. He checked the document. Approximately $280,000. Nobody spoke. The entire room just stared. Then Detective Monroe walked in. She'd clearly been listening outside. We've already confirmed most of these measurements. Michael looked surprised. You have. She nodded. And we found something else. She placed a flash drive on the table. This came from Richard's desktop computer. What is it? A folder. She looked around the room. He called it Expansion Plan. The detective connected the drive to a projector. The first file opened. A satellite image of the neighborhood. Every house had handwritten notes beside it. Elderly owner. Rarely outside. Easy to pressure. Likely to sell soon. My stomach turned. Then another page appeared. It listed every family on the street. Including me. Next to my name. Richard had written. New owner. Lives alone during weekdays. Can overwhelm with HOA complaints. Goal. For sale within 3 years. I felt my blood boil. The complaints. The fines. The rumors. None of it had been personal. It had been a business strategy. Then Detective Monroe opened one final file. It was titled, Future Expansion. The room became silent again. Richard had already selected his next 3 target properties. And every one of the owners. Was sitting in that meeting room. Several people gasped. One elderly woman started crying. The detective quietly turned off the projector. I think it's safe to say this wasn't a neighborhood dispute. She looked directly at everyone. This was an organized scheme. Then Michael Avery cleared his throat. There's one more thing. He opened the final envelope. I've located Richard's original property deed. He paused. Then looked straight at me. The legal description doesn't match the house that's actually standing there today. I stared at the attorney. Double quotes. What do you mean the deed doesn't match the house? Michael Avery slowly unfolded another survey. This one wasn't recent. It had been recorded 24 years ago. The official subdivision map. Signed. Stamped. Filed with the county. He placed it beside a modern satellite image. Look carefully. At first, I couldn't see it. Then Helen quietly pointed toward Richard's driveway. Oh, my stomach dropped. The house itself wasn't centered on Richard's lot. Not even close. It sat almost 3 feet farther east than it should have. The attorney nodded. Double quotes exactly. Double quotes the original foundation wasn't built where it was approved. Someone asked, "Are you saying his house is on someone else's property?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for another document. The original builder noticed the mistake. There are letters proving it. He handed them around the room. 23 years earlier, the construction company had written to the county. The foundation had been poured incorrectly. The builder wanted permission to correct it. The correction never happened. Instead, someone quietly changed later surveys to make the property lines appear different, not legally. Just gradually. Detective Monroe folded her arms. So Richard spent 20 years trying to hide an error that existed before he even bought the house. Michael nodded. Double quotes exactly. Double quotes. The room fell silent. Everything suddenly made sense. Richard hadn't started stealing land because he wanted a bigger yard. He'd started because if anyone ordered an official survey, they might discover his entire house violated the legal setback. One board member whispered, "So all those complaints were distractions." Richard wanted everyone looking at grass. Mailboxes. Trash cans. Holiday decorations. Anything. Except property lines. Michael continued. If an accurate survey had ever been performed, the county could have required expensive corrective action. Someone asked, like moving the house. The attorney sighed. In the worst-case scenario, yes. Nobody could believe it. Richard had terrorized an entire neighborhood. To keep anyone from asking one simple question. Where exactly is the property line? 3 weeks later, the county completed its own investigation. Professional surveyors spent 4 full days measuring every boundary, every easement. Every corner marker. When the final report arrived, it was worse than anyone expected. Richard hadn't taken land from one neighbor or two. He'd affected 7 different properties, some by inches, some by several feet. Even part of a public utility easement had been landscaped over. The county immediately issued multiple violation notices. Not HOA notices. Government notices. Those couldn't be ignored. Then came the biggest shock of all. The engineering department determined that Richard's detached garage had also been built partially outside his legal property line, not by much, about 28 inches, but enough to violate county code. Richard's attorney fought every finding, filed appeal after appeal, requested new surveys, demanded independent reviews. None of them changed the outcome. Every licensed surveyor reached the same conclusion. Months passed. The story made local news several times. People from nearby neighborhoods started contacting Detective Monroe. Some believed Richard had pressured them years earlier too. The investigation kept growing. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Michael Avery. They've reached a settlement, already partially. What does that mean? He smiled. The Harrison family has agreed to let you keep the vacant lot. That's good. It gets better. The county approved your new survey, so for the first time in over 20 years, the neighborhood finally has accurate legal boundaries. I laughed. So it's over. There was a long pause. Then Michael quietly said, "Not quite. The district attorney just informed me. They're considering filing one additional criminal charge." I frowned. "What charge?" He answered with a tone I'd never heard before. "Racketeering. Asterisk racketeering." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "Isn't that for organized crime?" Michael Avery nodded. "Usually, but this case has become much bigger than a neighborhood dispute." Over the next month, state investigators joined the case. Not because of the flower beds, not because of the fences, because of the money. The missing HOA payments, the fraudulent documents, the coordinated property encroachments. The investigators believed they were looking at an organized pattern of fraud, not isolated incidents. Richard wasn't arrested immediately. His attorneys fought every step. They filed motions, requested delays, argued that everything was a civil matter. Then the investigators finished examining his computers. That changed everything. Detective Monroe called me. "We recovered deleted emails. Were they useful?" She laughed. "They were devastating. Richard hadn't worked alone. The landscaping company owner had been receiving monthly payments. The fence contractor knew exactly where the legal property lines were. One survey technician had accepted cash to delay filing corrected measurements years earlier. Even worse, Richard had kept records of every payment, every favor, every person who helped him. The prosecutors now believed there had been a small network working together. Each person handled a different part. One moved landscaping, one installed fences, one created misleading site drawings. Richard coordinated everything. A grand jury reviewed the evidence 2 weeks later. Indictments were announced. Richard, the landscaping contractor, the fence company owner, and a former survey technician, 4 people. More than 30 criminal charges combined. The neighborhood couldn't believe it. For years, everyone had treated Richard like the annoying HOA guy. Now reporters were calling him the leader of a real estate fraud scheme. The trial began almost a year after I bought the vacant lot. The courtroom was packed. Several local news stations covered it every day. I testified for less than an hour. Most of my testimony wasn't even about my own property. It was about the notebook, the photographs, the surveys, the timeline. Helen testified next. She brought every one of her husband's photo albums. The prosecutor projected dozens of photographs onto a large screen. Year after year, the jury watched Richard's landscaping slowly creep farther across property lines. 6 inches, another foot, another 18 inches. Always gradual, always intentional. Then came the notebook. The prosecutor held it up. "Did you write this?" Richard looked at the jury. "No," the prosecutor smiled. "Interesting." He pressed a button. Richard's handwritten HOA meeting notes appeared beside the notebook. A handwriting expert testified. The writing matched, page after page. Then came the biggest mistake Richard ever made. The prosecutors played a voicemail recovered from his phone, Richard's own voice. "You don't take land all at once. You move it little by little. Nobody notices 6 inches." The courtroom became completely silent. His attorney lowered his head. He knew it was over. After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for only one afternoon. They returned guilty verdicts on nearly every major charge: fraud, forgery, theft, conspiracy, financial crimes. Several additional charges against the contractors. The judge called Richard's actions a calculated abuse of trust carried out over many years. Several months later, the county auctioned most of Richard's assets. The money recovered from the safe, along with proceeds from the sales, was used to compensate victims. No one received everything they'd lost. But many homeowners finally got something back for the first time in years. People felt like justice had actually happened. One Saturday morning, I walked across the vacant lot I'd bought almost 2 years earlier. The flower beds were gone. The illegal fence never existed. The property markers were exactly where they belonged. I looked across the neighborhood. Kids were riding bicycles again. Neighbors were talking in their driveways. Nobody seemed worried about clipboards or violation notices. Sometimes people ask me why I spent so much time fighting over a few feet of land. The answer is simple. It was never about the land. It was about refusing to let one person convince an entire neighborhood that bullying was just how things worked. The day I bought that empty lot, I thought I was buying a piece of property. I had no idea. I was about to uncover a fraud that had been growing, 1 inch at a time, for more than 20 years. The trial ended. The news cameras disappeared. The reporters moved on to the next headline. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the neighborhood was quiet. Actually quiet. The HOA elected an entirely new board. None of the previous members ran again. The first thing they voted on was eliminating the compliance committee. No more single person deciding who deserved a violation. Every complaint would now require independent inspections. Every fine would be reviewed by the full board, and every Dollar collected would be published in a monthly financial report. Transparency became the new rule. A few months later, the county finished correcting every property line in the subdivision. New survey markers were installed. Fresh maps were recorded. Every homeowner received an updated legal survey for the first time since the neighborhood had been built. Everyone finally knew exactly where their land began and where it ended. Helen invited the entire street over for a barbecue that summer. She smiled as she looked around. I haven't seen this many neighbors together in 20 years. She wasn't exaggerating. People who had barely spoken before were laughing together. Children played in yards without parents arguing over invisible boundaries. Even the atmosphere felt different. Lighter. During the cookout. Tom walked over holding a drink. If you hadn't bought that lot, none of us would have ever known. Carlos nodded. We all thought Richard was just annoying. Linda laughed. Turns out, he was running his own little empire. A few weeks later, I finally decided what to do with the vacant lot. Everyone kept asking if I was building a house, or a rental, or selling it. Instead, I hired a landscaping company, a different one with an excellent reputation. We planted dozens of native trees, built a small walking path, added benches. Wildflowers. A few picnic tables, nothing flashy, just a peaceful green space. One evening. Helen wandered over with a cup of coffee. She smiled. This is much nicer than another house. I looked around. Kids were chasing butterflies. Neighbors were walking their dogs. Families sat on the benches talking. I figured the neighborhood deserved something good after everything. She nodded. It does. About a year after the verdict, I received one last letter. It came from the county recorder's office. Inside was a single document, the updated deed for my property. Every measurement had been verified, every boundary permanently recorded. There was also a short handwritten note from Michael Avery. It read, "Congratulations! Your property is now one of the most accurately surveyed lots in the entire county." I laughed. After everything, that felt strangely satisfying. Sometimes people assume this story is about winning, about beating a difficult neighbor. About getting revenge. It was and single quotes T. Richard lost because he believed no one would ever question him. He counted on people being too busy. Too tired. Or too intimidated to push back. He was wrong. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about HOAs or surveys. Or property law. It was this: small abuses become big ones. When everyone decides they're too small to matter. Richard didn't steal a third of an acre overnight. He stole a few inches, then a few more. Then a little more. Year after year, until people forgot where the real line had ever been. Sometimes that's how dishonesty grows, not in giant leaps, but in tiny steps that no one challenges. Every now and then, I sit on one of the benches overlooking that little green space. I watch neighbors wave to each other. Kids ride their bikes, dogs chase tennis balls, and I think about the day I first saw that for sale sign. I almost kept driving. If I had, Richard probably would have found another victim. Instead, one simple decision changed an entire neighborhood. And every time I walk across that lot. I know exactly where the property line is, not because of the survey markers, but because someone finally decided. It was worth standing up for what was right.